So let's talk about question types. Every researcher is faced with this initial question. Do I ask an open-ended question or a closed-ended question? And there are advantages and disadvantages to both. Open-ended questions aren't restrictive. It lets the respondent search his memory and offer an answer without the researcher suggesting any sort of norm, right? And so if I ask, what's your favorite animal? And I leave that open-ended, you're free to say what your favorite animal is. If I give you a list of animals that can become pets, like turtles, fish, frogs, dogs, cats, right? You might pick one of those. But if I say sharks, panthers, zebras, then I've sort of pushed you into thinking about animals a certain way. What's your favorite? Which one question is really what would you rather have as a pet, and the other is what do you think is just a cool animal, right? And so researchers can push people around depending on how they ask questions. But these things are cumbersome to code because they're open-ended responses that someone has to read and typically quantify into something meaningful. And so what happens is you might have a person or two doing this if you've got lots of responses, or you might do a little bit one day and come back the next day and do it again, and you got a better night's sleep or a better meal, you're just sort of looking at the questions differently or looking at them differently after you've read a few, and so that creates some measurement error. And so the whole thing takes longer to do, which essentially costs more money and has a bit of error in it when you're trying to interpret people's open-ended answers. And so you might want to ask a closed-ended question. So obviously these are quick and easy to collect, and they self-code because you can only pick the response options available. But there are some dangers here too. Sometimes you can measure what are called non-attitudes. So perhaps I ask you a question about an issue that you don't have well-developed feelings or attitudes about, and you just give me an answer because there are some options there. So you're appearing to be helpful and participatory in the survey experience. And so you tick one of those radio buttons, but that doesn't reflect how you feel because you don't really have any feelings there to begin with. And so that starts to create noise in your investigation. And so at the same time, as I mentioned, if you give people response options, you're confining their attitudes to that sort of prefabricated set of response options. And so you had best be precise in that question wording, or else you may be missing an entire chunk of responses that people aren't able to give you. And so sometimes this can make an individual question less reliable and your research project less valid. So let's say you've decided on a closed-ended question. Question to yourself then becomes, do I do a ranking question or a rating question? And rating questions have all sorts of advantages over ranking questions. They're pretty easy to do. How cuddly is a rabbit is a simple, straightforward question that you can process quickly. Whereas if I say, how cuddly are these 15 animals, then you sort of have to think about the cuddle factor for each one, and then you have to rank them. And you're like, oh no, I forgot, maybe I move something around, and so that's a cognitively difficult task. It's also tough for the survey researcher to display on the screen. You've got lots of animals, several features that you're interested in measuring, and so now you're asking for rankings on different features, and it's easier to just present that one question with its own set of response options and move on to the next one. You can get through one rating question faster than you can one ranking question, even though a ranking question might be filled with sort of individualized ratings. Because it's faster, it can also lead to shorter survey times, which is often cheaper. But you also get more gradient data, because in a ranking question, you only know something about one object in relation to other objects. And so I know that a rabbit is more cuddly than a porcupine, but that's sort of all I know about. I don't have a degree of cuddly there. So that gives you more data, and that helps you get a more robust analysis strategy. And so there are all sorts of advantages of ratings, but the one advantage of a ranking is that you can do one ranking question, but it might take you 15 ratings to get the relationship between a rabbit and a porcupine, because you've got to get through all of them, all of the animals separately on an individualized basis. So, all right, so let's say you decided on the closed-ended question, you want some rating questions, and then the question yourself becomes, well, how many scale points do I need? Well, let me ask you this. How many, in various surveys, on the back of a receipt or online or anywhere, how many sort of scale points have you seen? I've seen crazy things, but what have you seen? 10? 11? 50?
I've seen 7.
7? How about 100? Yeah.
Like 1 to 100.
1 to 100.
Yeah.
It's a famous political measure called the feeling thermometer. How warm or cold are you toward Barack Obama, for example? And the idea being that the hotter you are to someone, you like them more. Well, maybe some people like being cold. Furthermore, what's the difference between a 76 and a 77? Besides the fact that a 77 is more than a 76. Not sure. Right? And in fact, when you see people use these 100-point scales, the answers cluster around 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100. And so what do you have there? 5 scale points, right? All right, so let's figure out how many we need. So we know we need more than 1 or 2, because we'd be throwing out information if we didn't have enough points. That allows people to express the full range of attitudes that might exist in the world. But again, too many might be ambiguous. So to figure out how many scale points you need to decide what type of concept you have in front of you. And there are unipolar and bipolar constructs. A unipolar construct is something like importance. So how important to you is it that we have coffee in the office every morning? Right? And so, like, I cannot live without coffee. Right? It just wouldn't be able to work. And some people maybe are allergic to coffee. Like, I could, doesn't matter to me if we have coffee or not. And some people are like, sometimes I have a late night or my child didn't sleep well or something, and I could just use a pick-me-up every once in a while. So right now we've got 3 response options. Couldn't live without it, definitely don't care, and occasionally. And then maybe some people are like, yeah, it's not that I don't care and wish we didn't have it and I'm allergic to it, but it's like I realize other people in the office really like it and I want to work with people who are pleasant, who've had their coffee, so I'm somewhere between I could care less and I drink it sometimes, right? So it's for the other people. And then beyond that, there's, I like it pretty regularly, but if, we didn't have it in the office, I'd just buy it myself. You see? And so now we've got 5 points. But if you think about importance, it feels like something that ranges from 0 or none to the maximum amount that a person could have about something. So that's a unipolar construct. Whereas a bipolar construct is something that has poles, obviously, one side or the other. And so I support or I oppose a tax increase. Or I'm particularly ambivalent. I don't have a job, and so I don't really care what taxes people pay. Well, of course, if you didn't have a job, you might be benefiting from some public services that require taxes, but let's ignore that use case for a second and just say that you're usually on one side or the other, or perfectly ambivalent. Now, when you're on one side or the other, then there are these 2 sort of mini tanks that feel like these unipolar tanks, because once you oppose, there's sort of degrees of opposition. There's a little bit of opposition, a moderate amount, and extreme opposition, right? And then if you're conversely on the other side, there's a little bit of support, a moderate amount, and extreme support. And so that's 7 points, 3 little mini unipolar tanks, and a perfectly ambivalent midpoint. All constructs boil down to this idea of unipolar or bipolar.